This podcast was created as a part of Podcast Lab by India Film Project in association with Anchor by Spotify.
Words have the power to change worlds, is what I ardently believe in. Sometimes words breathe better than I can, and maybe that is why I write. Writing is like oxygen for me, a necessity to live and to survive. Writing is how you get an insight into my world and my thoughts. Writing is how I wish to touch souls and invigorate a spark in people. Writing is how I create gems to be read, heard, shared, cherished, and loved forever. Because the writer, the creator, the artist might die one day, but the words, the art, they live on forever.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Closet Writer Chronicles. I'm your host Sangeeta, aka the Moody Marshmallow. You just heard our guest for today, Hemangini Mandaliya. Hemangini is a jewelry designer, author, illustrator, and a podcaster. She's a gold medalist from NIFT Kangra, has written a poetry book called We Remember, and runs a podcast called A Poetry Tribute. We talk about her different creative pursuits, burnout, and her vision as a creator. Hey everyone, welcome to this week of the Closet Writer Chronicles. I have with me Hemangini Mandaliya. Welcome to the show, Hemangini. It's so good to have you here.
Hey Sangeeta, it is amazing to be here as well, and I'm pretty excited and looking forward to this conversation with you.
Yeah, likewise. So, just to kind of dive right in, my first question for you is, what is your earliest memory of writing or just, being creative?
So, if I have been writing since I was pretty young, since I was in school, I think. But I think if I had to say I started writing maybe professionally or as a poet, then it would be in college. And I my first ever performance as a poet was in during the orientation program of my college. That was NIFT. I studied in NIFT,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah. So I remember this incident pretty distinctly because it was the first time that I performed in front of such a huge audience, and I was so scared of it. I had never performed poetry before. I had never performed any of my works before.
Okay.
And one of my other friends, so we both decided that we would take part together and we would perform poetry. So I wrote a poem. My college was in Himachal, so
Okay.
and I am from Gujarat. So
Okay.
I wrote the poem on my journey from Gujarat to Himachal, and it was
Wow.
in Hindi. And I remember the first lines. It started from Gujarat की गलियों से हिमाचल की वादियों तक. That was
Wow.
the first line.
Okay.
Yeah, and that was my first ever poetry performance, and that is I think that incident made a huge change in my life because I incidentally won the first prize for the original poetry that I wrote.
Okay.
And it gave me a certain confidence that I did not know I had, and that I could perform so well in front of such a huge audience.
Mm.
And that is where my journey as a writer, as a poet started.
Wow, that's amazing. So, is that how the Hedonist Writer was born? Was it from there that you decided to, kind of start a page? Like, why don't you, tell us about that? Because I'm curious to know, like, what started that journey and how you came with the pen name and the page and everything.
Yes, I think so. It is somewhere one of the reasons why I came up with the hedonist writer. So the hedonist writer is basically based on the philosophy of hedonism.
Okay.
And what hedonism says is happiness should be the chief goal of life.
Mm.
Whatever you do, even if it is the smallest thing, like even if it's just cooking a meal,
Mm.
then
Mm.
do it with a happy heart, and it's going to be a great experience for you. Yeah, so I think that is where the hedonist writer was born, because I have always held the belief that even the simplest tasks, if you do it with all your heart, then you are going to be amazing at it. And that is what life is all about. It is about the simplest things.
Mm.
And that is how the hedonist writer was born.
That's amazing. But it's really, it's interesting that you spoke about, creating things or doing things from like a happy heart. So then this is just like out of my own curiosity then. Like, do you ever write about like, I don't know, like darker emotions, like say when you're upset or like, like sadness or grief or, anger? Do you ever write about those things? Because you can't really
Yes,
write about those things from a happy place. So I'm just curious how you kind of go about that.
def- yeah, definitely. So I think my take on it is I do write about grief a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So actually, I lost my father last year during COVID,
Okay.
and that was a time when I wrote about grief a lot. And I
Mm.
was rethinking on this my pen name a lot at that time. Like,
Mm-hmm.
if I am I truly the hedonist writer right now at this moment, if I'm writing about grief, if I'm writing about sorrow.
Mm.
So what I came up with is life, happiness does not just mean the happy moments that you write about. Happiness
Yeah.
is being comfortable in the emotions that you are feeling currently.
Mm. Okay.
So yeah, so that is what my interpretation was, that it is okay to feel whatever emotion you are feeling, whether it be grief or happiness. But
Mm.
it is as important to face the darker sides, as important to face the not so good aspects of life, as
Mm.
it is to enjoy the good parts.
Yeah. No, that's beautifully put. And I really, more power to you for, the strength you've shown and just, talking about your father because I didn't know. So, thank you for sharing that. But yeah,
Yeah.
so I remember seeing your book, which is We Remember. And I know a poetry tribute is, the podcast you do and everything. But, first let's, talk about the book because I'm really curious to know how that came about because I know you're also doing merchandising. I don't know if it's related to the book or the podcast or both. But, how was the book born? Did the book come first or was it the podcast? Because I know you run a podcast which is for poetry as well. So which one came
Mhm.
first?
So the book came first, and the podcast was born on the same idea.
Okay.
So we remember, actually, I think the original idea started from Naporimo, National Poetry Month.
Ah,
That is
okay.
April. Yeah, so April 2021.
Mm,
So I
okay.
took part in the poetry month, and
Hmm.
I started writing. So I started writing with the purpose that I want to create some good poetry. I want to write something good. So
Hmm.
I thought I created my own theme, that I
Okay.
wanted to revolve all the poems around art and culture, because that was what I was very passionate about. I still, like, I write reading about this thing, so I thought I would convert what I read, what I am passionate about, into poetry. So that is where it started. So I did it for around 10 days continuously, and then I got infected with COVID, so it's kind of stopped there.
Oh.
But so after a month, then I came across a competition sort of thing on Instagram, where you had to submit a poem every day for 20 days, and at the end they would compile all of those poems and publish it in the form of a book. Yeah, so I challenged myself to took part in that, and submitted all 20 poems, and I completed the challenge. And it was, although it was a little long journey for publishing, and there were a lot of different hurdles involved in the
Hmm.
journey, but at the end it got published in, I think, December or January.
Okay. Okay. Wow. That's amazing. So then, and the podcast. started later last year, right? Because I know you were also part of Podcast Lab. Both of us are a part of Podcast Lab for listeners who may not
Yes.
know. So, both of us were fortunate enough to be a part of the same program. So, I know that it came then. But, since the podcast was based on the book in a way, what drove you to kind of start and apply to Podcast Lab, and just what was the seed to just start it? What was the idea of doing it? And the other reason I'm asking this is because today, like, I know poetry podcasts have become like such a big thing, right? So what drove you to start it and be like, okay, even if there are many more that are coming right now, let me just go ahead and do it.
Mm-hmm. Initially, what when I submitted, so for the podcast as well, I came across the podcast lab ad on Instagram, and it was
Mm.
like the day before the deadline.
Oh wow, okay.
So yes, and I submitted my idea on a whim, like let's what else could come out of it. This so I thought I would just take part and submit my idea
Hmm.
and see where it goes. And I got my idea got selected, and in the end I published the whole podcast season.
Hmm.
So where it started, the idea was initially what I thought was I would probably create an audiobook format for my book in the podcast
Okay.
itself. So
Okay.
if you see my initial episodes, so initial 4 or 5 episodes are the poems also included in my book.
Hmm.
But
Okay.
as yeah, but as I gradually progressed in the podcast and as I talked to my mentors as well, so they suggested was why not take this as another opportunity to create new content and create new things that you might not have written so far.
Hmm.
And it could also act as a guidance or as a guiding light for other listeners to go to your book and buy it to read what else you have written.
Hmm. Right.
So yeah, so I base the podcast on the same theme because I'm pretty passionate about art and culture and everything.
Mm-hmm.
But what difference is between the book and the podcast is okay, in the podcast I have also tried to include simple topics that usually people ignore or
Hmm.
people look at it in a very generic way. Like one of the episodes is called The Color Red.
Yeah.
So when we think of red we usually think of colors as just colors, but
Yeah.
what other way do we have to look at colors?
Hmm.
Because red is such a color that it can ignite both positive and negative emotions.
True.
So yeah, so that is what I've tried to do in the podcast, to look at very normal everyday topics from a
Hmm.
very creative and artistic and poetic point of view.
Yeah, no, and that's very evident also when I saw your episodes. But I was also curious to know, how do you, come up with the themes for your episodes? Do you come up with a list like beforehand, or is it like whatever you're feeling that week we want to produce? Because I saw
Hmm.
that there were, one was the color red, which you mentioned, but there's also stuff on like, Bhishma and mathematics and like Vincent van Gogh, and you've spoken about like Frida Kahlo, Amrita Sher. So there's a lot of stuff there, and there's one on Gujarat as well. So how do you kind of come up with what you want to write about and talk about for each episode? Do you decide
Hmm.
before you release the season, or is it like a week by week thing that, okay, this week I want to talk about this, so I'll talk about this?
So it's a bit of both, a little bit of pre-planning and a little bit of impromptu ideas.
Okay.
So yeah, so I do like have a in my notes app in my phone. I have kept a list of ideas. Like whenever when I'm commuting to work, or if something I see strikes my eyes or my heart, then I note it down, and maybe
Mm.
it might evolve into something different altogether. But I write down the ideas just to brainstorm later on. And
Okay.
sometimes when I am sitting down and I want to write about something, so I write about something that I am feeling the most passionate about or feeling the most attached to in that moment.
Mm.
So there's an episode on Lata Mangeshkar and on music.
Yeah.
So that I wrote that and published that in a day after Lataji passed away,
Yeah.
because I was feeling pretty overwhelmed with all my emotions, and she was someone that I revered a lot, and I
Mm.
really wanted to dedicate something to her.
Yeah.
So that is where that episode came from. So some of the episodes topics come very literally come to me while I'm doing something, and some of them are pre-planned. But
Okay.
yeah, so I try to uh, record while recording the episode. I try to feel the topic as much as I can.
Mm. That's no, that's really cool. And it really comes through because even the episodes like I heard, I could really tell it was done with a lot of emotion. Like you really felt what you were saying in those episodes. It was very evident. But also, just the note taking idea, what you said, it's so funny because I do the same thing with mine. Like, I do it for guests. So, literally,
Yeah.
I remember, like, for season one itself, I just created like a list of, like, say, 50 people I wanted to approach. And it's so funny that list kept building as, the season went by. Like,
Mm-hmm.
like suddenly I'd be doing something and I would think of someone, and or I'd be scrolling and I'd see someone and I'd just add names to the list like that. So I was like, oh, I do this too with notes. So
Yes.
completely relate.
And now it's like you have a potential list for the next season as well, because
Yeah.
you know you have somewhere to start already.
Exactly. Which I'm sure even you must have for yours because you just get that idea bank almost of things you can talk about or, people you can talk to, which I think is great. So, everyone listening, take notes. It's the best way to really get ideas for anything, honestly. Uh,
Definitely.
yeah. But, kind of shifting gears a little bit, I know you're also a jewelry designer. I mean, that's primarily one of the things you do, your day job, so to speak, if I can call it that. How did you decide to
Yes.
get into that?
So initially, after I finished my schooling, I did my schooling in science, and
Okay.
I wanted to be an architect.
Oh,
So
okay.
I appeared for the entrance exams, and there's a college called SEPT in Ahmedabad, which is
Mm,
pretty well known for being a good architecture school.
mm,
So I even got a good merit rank, and I even got into SEPT. But when I was giving the exam, I realized that I am not made to be an architect. मतलब अंदर से I had an intuition.
oh, okay.
So I had also given the exam for NIFT that year as well, but the results of SEPT usually come afterwards. So the opportunity to get into NIFT that year was gone.
Mm,
So I decided to take a drop year and explore my creative side and decide what I want to do. And
mm.
next year, I appeared only for NIFT and gave no other backup exam or anything else. Yes, and my whole family, my friends were like, "You are crazy to just give one exam. What if you don't get into it?"
Mm,
But at the end, I did get into it, and I decided that I wanted to go somewhere far from my home so that
mm.
I can explore myself and then as an individual and learn
Right.
who I am.
Mm.
So I chose to go to NIFT Kangra, which is in Himachal, and
Okay.
yeah, and living among the mountains really fueled my creativity, I would say.
Mm.
And yeah, and I was able to decipher who I am, where my interests lie. And in a way, it also brought me a lot closer to home and my heritage as well. So I
Wow.
come from a family of jewelry. I come from a jewelry background, basically.
Okay.
My fathers and my ancestors were in the have been in the jewelry profession.
Okay.
So we used to make jewelry, and yeah, we had karigars. We used to make gold jewelry, but then
Okay.
it kind of declined. And my currently we have a hallmark center, which also has to do with jewelry.
Okay.
So matlab I had a little bit of tinkling कि I want to go into jewelry because I had always been interested in it. So I
started in Kangra, we did not have a specialization for jewelry.
Okay.
So I used to, whatever assignments we were given, I used to find a way to incorporate jewelry into it somehow. So even if it was a craft like wood inlay or something to do with wood,
Right.
I made jewelry out of wood then.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, so I have created jewelry out of wood. I have created jewelry out of pine needle, which is sort of like bamboo. It is something that I've always been pretty attached to, and I've always been passionate about, just as I am about writing.
Hmm.
So I thought, why not make it into a profession, and why not carry my own heritage forward?
Yeah, definitely. But
Yeah.
that's so cool. And that's really amazing that you had that, that gut feeling, right? When you were giving the exam for architecture and you realized that this wasn't something you wanted to do and you wanted to kind of shift focus to jewelry and you took that gap for yourself and all, which a lot of people, I don't think, usually a lot of people don't have that kind of instinct or that focus at that point, right? Because everyone's just like, yeah, we'll join college, we'll do something, and then we'll see.
Hmm.
So it's really cool in a way that you kind of had that sort of gut feeling and that instinct to be like, no, this is not for me. Let me, do something else. So hats off to you for that. Honestly, it's very like admirable. Honestly, uh,
Yeah, it is something that I have innately built in me.
hmm. Which is really
Yeah.
cool, which is really cool. But yeah, then since you're doing so many like creative things, then have you ever faced, because as it is, I feel like in India especially, South Asia in general, but India especially, like whenever you do anything creative, you always do get some amount of judgment from people, especially like, I don't want to say older people, but generally you do get a sense of, judgment because it's not considered usually as a very conventional course of, of a profession. So have you ever faced any kind of assumptions or like misconceptions from people about any of, the creative endeavors you do? Be it jewelry designing or writing, your podcast, anything, like say from family, friends, or just random people you meet. Have you ever faced any kind of like assumptions?
Yes, well, initially when I was in college, so I even then I used to take part in a lot of literary events and everything. And because it was so far from home, so
Yeah.
it was like I hardly came once or twice or for vacation at home.
Mm.
So a lot of my relatives, a lot of the people that my parents knew, they were like, "Why are you sending your little girl so far away from home and she can so easily study in Ahmedabad?"
Oh.
So why? Yeah, it was like, and I am very grateful to have a family that supports me in all that I do, because my parents always answered my relatives on behalf of me, that we
Mm.
believe in our daughter so much that we know she can do this and she is great at what she does. And I think little by little, as I progressed in my creative journey, in my profession, even my relatives realized that I'm really great at what I do. I do
Mm.
not want to boast actually, but I graduated NIFT with a gold medal.
Wow.
So yeah, so when I got that, it was like a reply to all of the people who said that I cannot do this, because
Mm.
I actually did, and I graduated with graduated very well, and I that was my answer to everybody who said I could not do it, because I have always been attached to the creative fields, and I
Yeah.
never wanted to do something besides that.
Mm. No, that's amazing, and really, more power to you, Hemangini, for going after what you want. And I think hats off to your parents for giving you that kind of support, because that also, I feel like a lot of people aren't as blessed or privileged to have that. So you truly are very fortunate in that regard as well. But of course, you are talented, because a gold medal does not come without the work and the talent for sure. So congrats and more power to you. But
Thank you.
So since you do, so many creative things, jewelry design, writing, and just a lot of like interdisciplinary things, so to speak, what is your take on creative burnout and how do you deal with it?
I faced a creative burnout like during the making of my podcast. So after I created, I think around 5 or 6 episodes, I was at a stage where I was not able to create anything anymore. I felt like it was a huge task for me to create something. So even as a hobby, there was a time when I used to sketch a lot, and sketching was something that was like therapy for me. And even I did not feel like doing that even. And it was a stage where I felt like I do not want to do anything creative at all, because even at work it is my work also involves a lot of sketching, a lot of creative thinking. And I was at a stage where I felt like I was feeling pretty overwhelmed with everything. And I at that time I did not realize I am having a creative like burnout sort of thing, if that is how we define it. But during those days I realized that it is pretty important to take a break, because when you're multitasking and doing a lot of things, it becomes pretty easy to get uh, your energy down and be overwhelmed by all that is taking place, because when we are multitasking it, we have to divide our attention in so many things that we sometimes forget to take care of our own self.
Yeah.
And what I was doing was, I was doing so many creative pursuits, but it was difficult for me to take a breather and just come back home and relax.
Hmm.
So I took a little break for some time, and I tried to decipher how to manage all of these different interests and still keep my creative spirit going on.
So then
Yeah,
so then how did you kind of, find that balance then? Because you said you figured how to manage it. So then how did you do that?
I think the most important point was taking stress for everything. Like,
Okay.
yeah. So it was like what I decided was, जो भी हो जाए किसी भी चीज का कुछ भी stress नहीं लेने का.
Yeah.
मतलब it is like it's okay if you write a bad poem, it's okay if you publish a bad episode, just do it. मतलब
Hmm.
I think my main thing was I am a huge perfectionist. So it
Hmm.
is always like everything needs to be perfect, it needs to be tiptoe, and nothing has to be out of order.
Yeah.
um to give a friend's reference, I'm a huge Monica about everything.
Okay.
Yeah. And during that break time, I tried to get out of that cage of being a perfectionist.
Hmm.
Uh, and that is when I realized that it's okay to not do everything perfectly, because there is nothing called perfection. You
True.
create stuff and you get better at it every day, stage by stage.
Hmm. That it's great that you were able to find that balance, because I know creative burnout is something, I think, especially when you're doing something creative, which I guess usually a lot of people do as a hobby, when you especially do it as a profession, it can get
Hmm.
quite difficult because you're essentially doing something you love so much, as a job, right? So
Definitely.
it's great that you were able to find that balance. But yeah,
Hmm.
now we're kind of coming towards the end of this interview, and we always end with these last two questions. So the first
Hmm.
one I want to ask you is, what are your aspirations? What are you looking forward to in the near or even distant future?
Okay, so currently, I am also applying for a master's in design.
Okay.
And yes, at National Institute of Design. I wish to get into NID. Matlab, I have
Mm.
currently in the process of it, and I have cleared a few stages. The current goal is to go for a master's in design, explore my interests further in the design field during that master's course. And later
Mm-hmm.
on, what I envision myself doing is to create a space of my own, where
Mm-hmm.
my interests in art, design, literature, all of them all of them can merge and create a safe space where people can come and indulge themselves in what I create and what I have to offer. So
Hmm.
and meanwhile I also wish to so I create a lot of illustrations, I create a lot of sketches as well in my
Mm-hmm.
everyday life. Matlab, I never leave the house without the sketchbook.
Okay.
Wherever I go, my sketchbook comes with me. So whenever I go out, if I see something that catches my eye, if I want to remember that day, I would just sketch something to remember it or to portray it on paper. And
Okay.
I have started converting this into like tangible aspects. So like
Hmm.
some I have created prints of them, I have created t-shirts out of my artwork prints. So right now all of these are just prototypes, so I plan
Hmm.
to probably create my own brand and merchandise my artworks and even include my writings and literature into it. And I think my further goal and vision as a creator is to give back to the community and give back to the land that I was born in. And
Hmm.
my attachment to India is one of the reasons why I am not applying for a master's outside India, or why I do not wish to stay outside India for the long run. It's
Hmm.
because I believe that the land that I was born in, I need to give back to it. I need to do something for it while during my whole lifetime. And
Hmm.
all the crafts of India, the rich culture that it has, it is something that I want to work for uh, during my creative journey, and I want to like all of its arts and crafts. I want to work with them. I want to work with the artisans, and I
Yeah.
want to create things that helps empower them as well.
Hmm.
and, and I think my longer vision would be to get into the teaching profession and probably share what I have learned with new creators on the
Hmm.
journey of being a creator themselves.
Wow. That's
Yeah,
amazing. And I'm excited for you in this journey that you're on, and I can't wait to see all the amazing things that you do. You're already doing amazing things, so I can only imagine how many more great things you'll do, in the coming years. And yeah, hopefully we will talk again in a future season about all the other amazing things you end up doing.
definitely.
But on that note, our last question for this episode. What is a piece of advice or learning you'd like to share with people? It can be creative, professional, or something you've experienced in life and you just wish more people were aware of.
So, like we talked about the my creative burnout stage, right? So
Mm.
at that time, something that I realized was inspiration is a myth. If
Okay.
you want to do something, just do it. Don't There are times when we are procrastinating and we say ki I'm not feeling inspired to work, I'm not feeling inspired to create. But
Mm.
it is something that is an illusion that I feel we live under. Ki if you are waiting to feel inspired, you will just keep waiting. you'll
Yeah.
never you will never take the first step, you will never create.
Mm.
So if you want to create, just create. Matlab, don't wait for motivation or inspiration. Don't wait to see a motivational video, get inspired, and start creating.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, I read somewhere that action begets motivation. So if you start doing it, then motivation will come by itself. So if you want to write something and you don't feel inspired, just pick up the pen and write whatever comes to your mind.
Mm.
Write words that don't make sense, because you can edit something that you have written, but you cannot edit something that you cannot edit a blank page.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that is something that I think a lot of us don't realize in our daily lives. We wait to feel inspired, we wait to be motivated, even like for simple things in life. Even like, for example, if you want to start exercising, so we make such motivational lists, we make m- motivational playlists of songs and everything
Mm.
to feel inspired. But I think it is in the moment, and even I have been trying to incorporate this motto in my life. I'm still working on it as well. But yeah, that is something that I would wish we understood more easily,
Yeah.
that you don't, the inspiration is just within you. Just start doing things that you want to do.
Yeah. No, that's amazing. And on that inspirational and much needed answer, we have now come to the end of this conversation. Thank you so much for being here, Hemangini. It was such a pleasure talking to you.
Yes, it was amazing talking to you as well. And I think I would rather not say the end of the conversation. I like the terminology that let's put a pause on this conversation, and
Definitely.
I'll see you in a next season maybe.
Yeah, for sure. And on that note, season one has come to an end, but this show is on a pause, guys, as Hemangini said. So we'll be back very soon.
Yes, that's the motivation.
So that was my conversation with Hemangini Mandaliya. I really enjoyed this chat and I couldn't have asked for a more wholesome episode to end season 1. I mean, put a pause on the conversation. Ending this episode with a poem written and narrated by Hemangini. I'll see you very soon with a brand new season and many more guests and chronicles to share. Talk real soon.
So, I thought today I would share a poem from my poetry book We Remember with you, which is all about celebrating the art, culture, and artists of the world. Presenting to you ballet. As gracious as a falling feather, as soft as a cotton ball. Ballet, a magical movement of the body, an art form that celebrates human anatomy. It excites you, it provokes you, it even disturbs you. Ballet strikes you straight in the heart. It transports you to an ethereal world of the Nutcracker, Swan Lake, and the Sleeping Beauty. The stories and the moves make you forget reality. The flamboyant yet subtle costumes, the tutus and the slippers exist in a world of their own. As you gaze at the swerving ballerina, time seemingly stops as she takes a leap in the air and lands elegantly on the stage. Stately, agile, dexterous are lesser adjectives, for this poetry in motion can't be described in words. The simple beauty of a cherry blossom petal falling, swaying in the space. The remarkable water ripples on the surface as you throw a stone in the river. The gentle crunch of the dry leaves beneath your feet as you walk in the park. The sizzling sensation of feeling the first fresh snow on your face. The heavenly perfume of the wet soil after it rains. These metaphors, perhaps, truly portray this stupefying art form. Ballet enlightens us as human beings to ponder and strive beyond our limits. It encourages us to take a leap of faith, to take risks and trust our instincts. So, do it. Take that leap of faith. Take that leap of faith.